I took a look to see what percentage of people actually make their resolutions. What I found from one study is that less than 25% of people made it a month in before they lost their resolution. And then only 8% actually made it all the way to the end of the year and kept whatever their resolution was. And I don't think that's surprising to me, but I think part of the reason that people have such difficulty actually meeting any of their resolutions is that they don't put a lot of thought and strategy into how they're going to do that. They just set some vague, difficult goal and don't have any steps in between. So I want to make sure that I have these steps and maybe give some tips and strategies that could help other people meet their own goals themselves. So one thing that I think is important to realize about resolutions is what you're actually trying to do is almost always trying to change your habits. You're either trying to create a new habit or you're trying to stop yourself from continuing doing this one habit that you already have. So I think it's really useful to think of resolutions as habits rather than just some end goal. With that in mind, there's a lot of science and thought behind how habits actually work that you can take into account and figure out how you're going to make this habit happen. So, what are some strategies that you can think about maybe incorporating yourself? One is that you can try to add something to make it a bit more enjoyable. An example is if you want to go to the gym or you want to run regularly, you could also add something onto that. So while you're doing it, you could listen to podcasts that you really like or watch a YouTube video if you're on a treadmill. Just something that gives you that little boost of dopamine that you need. Dopamine is a positive chemical that makes you feel good about whatever you were doing. And eventually once you've really worked on this habit and developed it on its own, you'll get dopamine just from doing it because you'll feel better about doing the things that you want to do. You'll feel healthier. You might see progress in the mirror, and that'll help release the dopamine when you actually just go and do it on a regular basis. Another thing that's really useful to adjust is friction. So if doing a task that you want to do is really difficult, there's a lot of steps involved, it's going to make it much harder for you to do it, much easier to procrastinate it and stop doing it. So again, on the exercise example, anything that can make it a little bit easier to get yourself out the door to exercise is going to reduce the friction to get there. So something someone might do is like put their gym clothes on when they go to sleep at night. So when they wake up in the morning, they're ready to go, and it's much harder for them to avoid doing it. Or you can just leave your gym clothes at the front door. Either way, you want to try and find whatever you can to make it much easier in the moment of when you want that habit to happen. Something related to that I find helps make things much easier is to have a set concrete schedule for when you're going to do whatever the thing is that you want. And just saying you're going to do it on Wednesdays at this time is not going to be the most useful. But if you actually say set that time in your calendar, you have an hour blocked off, there's no way to have any meetings or anything like that. You set an alarm that's going to remind you now is when you have to do it. It's going to help create that trigger and block that time out, so you have to do it then. You don't have any other things that are going to take up your time then. Another thing is that we're very social creatures, so we don't want to let other people down, and we want to spend time with other people. So something that can help a lot with making these habits actually stick is to have someone else who agrees to do it with you. So say every time, once a week on this day, a friend of yours is going to show up at your door and force you to do this habit because they're doing it, so you're going to do it. It'll make it much easier to stick with it. But I think you really want to avoid with this, and I've done this before, is that if either of the two people are not that committed and are not going to continue doing whatever it is you want to do, then it's going to actually have the opposite effect. Because if your friend isn't going to show up, then, oh, that's an excuse. You don't have to do it anymore. So make sure that both of the people are super committed to what you want to do. All right, so I'm going to quickly go over my resolutions this year and the strategies that I'm going to use to try and make them. Okay, so this year, just recently, I learned how to do some basic Python, which is a coding language. And I don't want to lose that because I think like any other language, if you don't practice it, you're gonna forget how to do it. So, okay, what was my general long goal for a year. I thought if I spent probably 100 hours throughout the year, I'd be able to grow and learn a little bit more and make sure I don't forget what I've learned along the way. And that's way too long of a time frame, and that it's not really a specific habit. So instead, I decided I wanted to spend at least 15 minutes one day a week working on coding. And if you check the math, it does not add up to 100 hours in a year. But I think that's okay. I think if you set yourself a short period of time, it helps by making it a really easy activity to get into. Like, I can easily spend 15 minutes working on something. That's not that hard. I just sit down, I work on it for 15 minutes. And chances are, if I'm starting to get into it, I'm in the middle of something, I'm learning something new, I'm gonna probably spend more than 15 minutes. I'm probably gonna spend a couple hours maybe. But I need to allow myself to be able to just take those 15 minutes and be done, because that'll make it that much easier to make it a habit and continue to do it. Something else that I find really hard working from home all the time is it's really hard to stick with a set schedule of work. I'm super flexible during the day. I can mostly work whenever I want to, but what that means is that I can also start late if I want to, or I can take time in the middle of the day and do the dishes or do clean the house or something that isn't really needed to be done at that moment. And then I end up starting late and having to make up for it and working super late. And there's no specific start and stop time. Okay, so one thing that I'm gonna do for this is I'm gonna set an alarm for 7:30 every day. And it doesn't matter what time I go to sleep at the night before, I always have to get up at the latest 7:30. And I can set an earlier one if I want, but I can't touch that 7:30 alarm. That's stuck there. So that means that I'm gonna be ready and have to be starting by 9 a.m. no matter what. Start earlier, that's fine, but it has to be by 9 a.m. at the latest. And then I'm also gonna track my time working throughout the day, which I normally do most of the time, but not consistently. So I'm going to always track when I'm working and make sure I get in full 8 hours by 7 p.m. If I don't track it and I don't make sure that I hit that number by 7, then it's going to allow me to waste too much time during the day. Another related thing is I want to stop using social media on weekdays. I feel like I gain almost nothing from scrolling endlessly through social media, and it's weirdly hard to stop once you've started. So I'm going to set a rule where I can't look at social media at all during the week at least. And I think if you set this rule on its own, it's going to be hard to follow. But there's this really useful app that I use. It's called Freedom. And it works for your browser on your computer, and it works for your phone for apps as well. And you can set times during the day or during the week, like any kind of schedule that you want. And you can block whatever apps and sites you don't want to allow yourself to go on. And it seems pretty ridiculous. Like, why not just don't go on them? But I think a lot of people realize that it's so hard to do unless there's something stopping you from doing it. You need more friction to not allow you to do that act. So I'm not sure if I really used all the strategies for my own habits. And for yourself, you probably won't end up using all of them either. You might use some strategies for some resolutions, some for others. But the important thing is to think about it and to try and set these strategies in stone so that you're gonna continue to do them for the next year. And those key strategies, again, are to make the activity more enjoyable, try and add a little bit of that dopamine boost. Another thing is to reduce friction as much as possible, or potentially add friction as something a habit that you don't want to do. You can make a schedule and stick to it, and you can try to find someone to have as a social support to help both of you work towards that goal. So if you think it might be useful to you, you can share this video with your resolution or comment it underneath or share your resolution any way you want. But here's an important part. You can't just say what your end goal is. You have to also include a specific strategy that you're going to do to help you meet that resolution. So if you do that, I think the chance of you meeting the resolution is going to be a lot better than the 8% of people who actually make their resolutions out there in the rest of the world. So all the best. I hope you do what you want to do, and happy 2021.